start now. I'd like to get started. I know a few of our people have another IBS class this morning, so they can't attend. But for the rest of us, we always try to have at our MAP seminars a lecture by Reverend David Matsumoto. He's one of the main teachers here at History and Buddhist Studies, and so we're very, very fortunate. He always gives us his time to give us a lecture on some topic in Jodo Shinshu. So we've been having this whole series of studying the Tannisho with Reverend Matsumoto and Dr. Mark Blum, who teaches at UC Berkeley. So they've been taking turns, and in December we'll have Dr. Blum for his lectures for the winter map, and for the fall map we have Reverend David Matsumoto. As always, he prepared extensively for us with his handouts. So I'd like to turn over to Reverend Matsumoto.
Thank you, Reverend Harada. Can we begin with Tannisho? Namo Amida Butsu. Well, thank you. I think I should close the door, since otherwise we'll hear Judy's laughing. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the invitation from Reverend Harada, Reverend Kuwahara, and all the folks at CBE. Some of you I see just about every day, but it's nice to see others after a long time, and I think I've met all of you before, which is great. Today, as Reverend Harada mentioned, I'll be sharing some thoughts on the Tannisho, here, sections 15 and 16. I prefer not to call these sections as chapters. To me, the word chapter doesn't quite fit the way the text is structured, but be that as it may, I'm going to be talking about 15 and 16 today. Before I do, however, I just wanted to mention a couple things. I think some of you have been taking part in this series of Tannisho lectures, but some of you have probably not. I think most of you have, to some extent. So I don't intend to do an introduction or overview today. It is possible we do have materials available for you if you'd like to get a general introduction to the text. For those of you who have taken the course here at IBS, or you had a chance to talk a little bit about Tannisho translations during one of the other courses, Terms, Texts, and Translations. Just a kind of a real quick overview as to what sort of, what we're looking at in terms of the text itself. And that's about the extent of what I'd like to do as far as an introduction. The text itself was probably written by a fellow by the name of Yu Yen, or Yu Yen Bo, who lived during the time of Shinran, and more than likely came from the group called the Kawada Monto. He likely was much younger than Shinran and sat in and during some of the Dharma discussions that Shinran took part in over the course of many years. And it's likely that he took notes, and that's what he wrote down some of his thoughts in the form of notes that we now know as Tannisho, a record and lament of divergences as translated by CWS, or notes lamenting differences. Some of you have the Yukoku translation or a variety of other translations. There's a lot of history to it, and it's a provocative text, one that has really captured the fancy of people throughout the world, people who are Shin Buddhists and people who are not. And for many people, this was sort of the portal to Shin Buddhism for them. And so, but it's a text that's quite, it's simple in appearance, and yet it's very problematic in the way ideas are presented. And we'll see some of that today. There are a number of translations of the Tannisho, and so that's one of the things that we talk about and we use in our class here at IBS. Currently, let me just say, there are probably about nearly 20 English translations that we've been able to uncover over the course of a number of years. We use about 13 or 14 of them in our Tannisho class. And for those of you who might be interested in taking the class, it is available. You could take it online if you're not here in Berkeley, or you're welcome to take it if you're here. we will be kind of revamping the class. So those of you who have taken it in the past, you're welcome to sit in again. We're taking it, it's a bit different. We're going to be really focusing on doing a real detailed analysis of the English translations that are available to us, and using that as a vehicle, primary vehicle for really understanding not only the ideas, but the use of terminology and sort of the historical doctrinal context of the text. And so we'll be actually, one of the projects will be to do our own English translation of the Tannisho, or if you feel more comfortable in another language. We need a Spanish translation of the Tannisho, we don't have one, or some other language. There are a number of other, it's been translated into a number of other languages, just as an example here. Let's see, we have a French translation, German, Dutch, Russian. Oh, there's a Spanish. I'm sorry, my apologies. Apologies. We need another one. And there's 2 Portuguese translations, and there's one in Esperanto. It's been widely treated by a number of different people, and I think that's one of the real interesting facets of this whole adoption of and engagement with this text over about 100 years since people have really known it in the West. It's that very act of translating it and trying to understand it really represents, in my mind, sort of a living laboratory, the way Buddhism is transmitted. And so we'll be talking about things like that too in our class, which will be offered in the spring. So it's kind of an advertisement for that if you'd be interested. Many of you know also that Dr. Blum has started a project, a Tannisho workshop, that it's a 5-year project that involves UC Berkeley and 2 universities in Japan, and IBS is also involved. And there have been 2 meetings so far, and it's been quite fascinating. One of the real focuses of the project is to read and translate some Edo period, that is Tokugawa era commentaries, some of the earliest commentaries of the Tannisho, done by some scholar priests in the Higashi Honganji tradition. And so it's been a real interesting and kind of a fun experience. Reverend Kuwahara is also a part of that, as is Amy Umezu, who is an IBS student in the Kyoshi certificate program. So the project meets twice a year, once in Japan and once here in Berkeley, likely once again here at the Jodo Shinshu Center. So if any of you might be interested in just sitting in, I think Dr. Blum would not mind. Some of you might have before. Did any of you sit in the March meeting? A number of people in the MAP program did, because he talked about it, and so I think he'd invite any interested person to take part. So we'll let you know more about when and where it's going to be, and if you have an interest in that sort of thing, you're more than welcome to. And again, if you have an interest in studying the text, you're more than welcome to take the course, which will be offered in the spring of 2018. So that's just a brief, broad interview to what we're doing with Tannisho. Okay, any of you have any questions about that? If you have an interest in either of those events, let me know, okay? So, we're going to be using the collected works of Shinran, which I see most of you have, all of you have, as our default English translation, our default version of Tannisho. And so, if you have another version, you're more than welcome to open up that as well. If you could open up in CWS to page 674, you can see the section 15. If you have the Ryukoku translation, it is on page 61. So anyway, what I'd like to do is ask people to first read that section for us. So could we just get some volunteers to read section 15, one paragraph at a time? So who'd like to start off? Go ahead.
So, on the assertion that one attains enlightenment even while maintaining this bodily existence full of blind passions. This statement is completely absurd. The attainment of Buddhahood with this very body is the essence of the Shingon esoteric teaching. It is the realization achieved through the 3 kinds of mystic acts. The purification of the 6 sense organs is the one vehicle teaching of the Lotus Sutra. It is the virtue acquired through the 4 practices of repose. These are both ways of difficult practice to be followed by those of superior capacity. They lead to the enlightenment realized through fulfilling contemplative practice. Attaining enlightenment in the coming life is the essence of the Pure Land teaching of other power. It is the principle actualized through the settlement of Shinjin. This is the way of easy practice to be followed by those of inferior capacity. It is a teaching that makes no distinction between the good and the evil.
Thank you. Someone else like to read the next paragraph? Okay, thank you.
Since it's extremely difficult to free oneself from blind passions and the hindrances of karmic evil in this life, even the virtuous monks who practice Shingon and Tendai teachings pray for enlightenment in the next life. In our case, what more need be said? We lack both observance of precepts and comprehension of wisdom, but when, allowed by ourselves to be carried on the ship of Amita's vow, we have crossed this ocean of suffering, that is birth and death, and attained the shore of the Pure Land. The dark clouds of blind passion will swiftly clear, and the moon of enlightenment, true reality, will immediately appear. Becoming one with the unhindered light fills the 10 quarters. We will benefit all sentient beings, and that it is at that moment that we will attain enlightenment.
Thank you. Would someone like to read the next 2 paragraphs? Thank you.
Do those, excuse me, do those who speak of realizing enlightenment while in this bodily existence manifest various accommodated bodies, possess the Buddha's 32 features and 80 marks, and preach the Dharma to benefit beings like Shakyamuni? It is this that is meant by realizing enlightenment in this life. It is stated in a hymn, when the time comes for Shinjin, indestructible as diamond, to become settled, Amida grasps and protects us with compassionate light, so that we part forever from birth and death.
Thank you. Would someone like to read from the next part to the end?
I will.
Thank you.
This means that at the moment of Shinjin become settled, we are grasped, never to be abandoned, and therefore we will not transmigrate further in the 6 courses. Only then do we part forever from birth and death. Should such awareness be confusedly termed attaining enlightenment, it is regrettable that such misunderstanding should arise. The late master said, according to the true essence of the Pure Land way, one entrusts oneself to the primal vow in this life and realizes enlightenment in the Pure Land. This is the teaching I received.
Thank you very much. Another note before we continue, the Tannisho consists of a number of different portions. It consists of a short introduction. There's 10 sections that are set out. There's sort of another preface for the latter part. And then the latter part of the text consists of 18 sections. And then there's a postscript. It's said, according to the tradition, that the first 10 sections, if you look in the collected works of Shinran, it starts on page 661. There were 10 sections here that go into page 666. It's said that those first 10 sections represent teachings of Shinran himself, in the sense that the image is that Yuyen is there and he's listening to Shinran speak, and he writes down what Shinran says. That's the idea, right? So this is his record of Shinran's words. And so the tradition says the first 10 section represents Shinran's teaching directly, okay? And some traditions take it as it's more direct than any other, even Shinran's writings, because this is what Shinran said. These are his spoken words that he shared directly with Nembutsu followers. Okay, so that's the idea. So the first 10 are said to represent Shinran's teachings himself. The latter 18 sections, which start on 667 and go quite a ways to 677, okay, these are said to represent Yuyen's comments, his writings in response to specific divergent or mistaken beliefs. Okay, And in the latter 18 sections, or not 18, that's not right, not 18. My math is terrible. It's early in the morning. So it's 8 sections. So, okay, that's right. So 10 plus 18 does not equal 18. Okay, so the latter 8 sections represent Yuyen's perspectives. And so in that, the structure of that part, the latter part, you'll see the opening words are put in italics by Yuyen. These are sort of said to represent the divergent or mistaken or heretical beliefs. And then the more lengthy prose section is said to have been written by Yuyen. Okay. So in the tradition then, the latter 8 sections are generally viewed in that way. They're viewed as important, but they're not seen as specific words of Shinran. However, other people have different views, and certain of the sections, especially 13, is seen as being more or less authoritative. But anyway, that's sort of how things are viewed. Then in the postscript, we also find Yuyen's comments, and there are some portions where he's said to be quoting Shinran directly. Okay. Again, these must be Shinran's spoken words, because for the most part we don't find these passages in Shinran's writings for the most part. Okay. Then at the very end there's some historical records, and then at the very end Renyo's note, which is a quite interesting one. So anyway, where we are at is in the latter portion, latter 8 sections, and so I appreciate your reading. What we saw then is on page 674, in italics, is on the assertion that one attains enlightenment even while maintaining this existence full of blind passions. That represents Yuyen's statement of the divergent or mistaken belief. Okay, and then what we see in the next portion is his response to that. And at the very end, where he says the late master said, he's likely citing Shinran. Okay, and then there's also a quotation of a hymn from one of Shinran's wasan. So that's how it's structured. So, so you take a look at the handout. I gave you 2 handouts. One, Tannisho section 15, Tannisho section 16. Both contain more information than we can possibly cover today. And so we won't try to cover it all. Okay? But I just wanted to give it to you for your future study. You could just kind of keep it as maybe as not so much a reference, but a study guide. I've tried to give you extensive quotations from Shinran and other Pure Land sources that will help, I think, guide your study. So this is kind of the way I'd like us to kind of approach it today, if that's okay. First, start with an overview. It's just my summary, and it's just kind of our way of getting into the section. So the overview. The notion that one attains enlightenment even while maintaining this bodily existence full of blind passions expresses the way of difficult practice for those of superior capacity. Attaining enlightenment in the coming life is the essence of the Pure Land teaching of other power. It is actualized through the settlement of Shinjin. It is the way of easy practice for those of inferior capacity. At the moment Shinjin is settled, one is grasped, never to be abandoned. Therefore, we will not transmigrate further in samsaric existence, but this awareness should not be confusedly termed attaining enlightenment. Then I've given you an idea of how this might be. We look at the structure of this section. There's the Japanese section, which starts Bon no Gusoku no Mi, represents the divergent view that one attains Buddhahood in this very body. The second section, Sokushin Jobutsu wa, this refers to paths for those of superior and also inferior capacities. And then Oyoso Konjo ni, this represents the section detailing the difficulty of attaining Buddhahood with this very body. And then the fourth section is on the next page, Wasan ni Iwaku. This is the Jodo Shinshu perspective on attaining Buddhahood. And the fifth one is Jodo Shinshu Iwa. This represents Yuyen's teaching of the essential teaching of Jodo Shinshu, quote Shinran. So those are the ways in which we might look at the structure of this section. There may be other ways as well. I just wanted to suggest that as a possibility. There are a number of key terms, and these are just sort of a selection. Actually, I trimmed this down from about 30 terms to make it a little bit, it's only got it to 22 though. Disappointed I had to cut it more out. Anyway, just a few, and there are certainly many. So there are terms in Japanese. One of the things I always recommend to our students here at IBS is that you keep and create your own glossary of terms. There's some good glossaries and dictionaries around, but what I find it's really useful if you create your own. You don't have to, it's not a really hard thing to do, is as you're reading through these works, just write down words that kind of strike your fancy or seem important to you. Write it down in English, and then when you have the time, you can go back to other sources. This Dukoku translation is a really good source for that. Just kind of go backwards and find the Japanese term and its romanization. And then just give yourself your own brief explanation or definition. And if you do that regularly, as you're reading these texts, by the end of your career here at IBS for sure, you have a pretty good glossary. And if you're really handy with using spreadsheets and other sorts of things, you could do something that's really useful, because then you can start applying this and adding to it in many different ways. I found that it's really a good thing to do. Anyway, I urge all of you to do it as well as you read not only Shinran but other works. So anyway, here's just a few suggested key terms. Going through all of them, just kind of pick out a few here and there. The first one is Bonno Busoku. This is one that we hear often in Tannisho and other Shin writings. This bodily existence full of blind passions. Okay, so this is a reference to ourselves. Other words, number 3, Sokushin Jobutsu. We'll talk about this. This is the teaching of the Shingon school, that enlightenment takes place in with this very body. I mentioned Shingon Mikkyo, the esoteric teaching of Shingon. And then Yuyen makes a reference, very interestingly enough, to what he calls Hoka Ichijo no Shosetsu, the one vehicle teaching of the Lotus Sutra, which is likely a reference to Tendai Buddhism. And then there are others as we move down, just kind of jumping down. Number 9, Shinjin Ketsujo, the settlement of Shinjin, is an interesting use of that term. And then things like Bonno Akusho, number 11, blind passions and hindrances of karmic evil. This sort of raises a lot of interesting questions about terminology and translation. One of the discussions we always have here as IBS is whether evil is an appropriate translation for the word aku. And there's lots of opinions going back and forth all over the place. Another is blind passion. I don't like the translation blind passions. It's a translation of bonno, or in Sanskrit klesha, which means afflictions or delusions. I think something like that is perfectly fine. But anyway, there's a lot of discussion we could have about that. And those are the kind of things and thoughts that you can insert into your own glossary as you create it. Number 13, Mida no Gansen, this idea of the ship of Amida's vow. This is a metaphor that Shinran uses often. And it's interesting, as you know his life story, he lived in a landlocked area, right, in Hino. And then he lived in Kyoto. He was on a mountain and lived in Kyoto, kind of in the middle of the land. And then he was exiled to the borderlands up in Niigata, on the coast of the Japan Sea. And what we see in his writings subsequent to that are many references to the ocean and to the ships. And it's said that he probably traveled to Echigo by ship. That was probably the only way. And I imagine him sitting forlornly, now a person who's been defrocked, a stranger in a strange land with no marketable skills, sitting there in Echigo, sitting on the beach, watching the waves of the ocean. I can just imagine that. But then at the same time, the idea of the metaphor of ocean took on many different levels of meaning for him, and many different nuances. And I think it's really important. And then attached to that is the idea of the ship. He used it often, the ship of the vow. And I think that becomes something of great personal and salvific importance to him. Anyway, so we see it here. We see Yuyan also He must have heard it from Shinran as well. He talks about it as well. Anyway, I won't go through all of it. There's a lot of different terms, and I just invite you to develop your own glossary. Okay, so as you can tell, my voice is fading quickly. I'm sure you all experienced something similar because of the smoke in the air. I may not have a voice by the end of today's session, so bear with me if you don't mind. So I want to cover some of what's in this handout really, really briefly, but let me just preface it in this way. I don't want to make this overly, kind of an overly doctrinal kind of discussion, but I think one of the issues that is being brought up here in section 15 is one that we still see very much today, is what is the nature of salvation? What is the nature of the resolution that Shinran points to in Shin Buddhism? Other schools of Buddhism set out as a hope and a promise is enlightenment, the attainment of enlightenment, becoming Buddha here and now in this world, in this very life. And then Shinran and Yuyen talks about a couple of examples of that. But what about Shin Buddhism? What does Shinran teach us is our place within that broader scheme of the path of enlightenment. There are many in the history of Shin and today as well who make a claim that when a person realizes Shinjin, that this is to become a Buddha. One is enlightened here and now. This world becomes the Pure Land. And those sorts of discussions are often heard and seen in many different quarters. Now, I think that's the issue raised here. That's exactly what's going on here in this section. When in our class, some of you are in that class in the works of Shinran 3, we're studying Shinran's major work, True Teaching, Practice, and Realization. And if you have your CWS with you, I'm going to turn to that chapter that we looked at in the outset of the class this semester on page 170, no, I'm sorry, wrong passage, chapter 4, 153. This is the beginning of the 4th chapter of Shinran's major work, the True Teaching, Practice, and Realization. Oh, there's Yumi taking photos again. Hey, Yumi. She comes in and takes photos. I have to act as if. Straighten my back. I hear my mother saying, straighten your back. So we have to act as if we're having a good time too. Anyway, so thank you. Anyway, so this chapter is the chapter on realization. This idea of realization is, the word realization is a translation. It's a translation of the word sho, which has many different meanings. And we looked at different English translations of this chapter, and we saw, well, the CWS translates it realization, the Ryukoku translates it as enlightenment. Inagaki Sensei Hisao translates it as enlightenment. D.T. Suzuki translates it as realizing, I think. And there are a variety of translations, and so the question we talked about is, what's a proper translation of the word sho? And it was a real interesting discussion, one that I don't think we need to replicate today, but I think that's sort of also part of the issue here. What is the nature of realization? What is the nature of attainment in Shin Buddhism? What do we attain, and how, and when, and why, and all these kinds of questions, I think, are really lie at the base of this. And so, once again, I think there are some people who read Shinran and interpret it in that way, that that the person of Shinjin becomes a Buddha here now, is enlightened, or at least, at the very least, is born in the Pure Land. In contrast to that, that view is something we see here in Tannisho section 15. And what I wanted to present today are just some thoughts that respond to that discussion, because I think it's a real discussion. It's alive, and I think many of you will come across it in your temple, with your members, or even yourself. Okay. What is the nature of this, and what does enlightenment really mean in the Shin Buddhist tradition? So, that's what I wanted to talk about today. And so some of these elements are maybe more than we have time to talk about. And I'll need a timekeeper here. I'm not good at keeping time. 9:30. So we want to go till about 10:15. So you can take a break, something like that. Okay. All right. Let's rush through this. Starting on page 3, there's some traditional Buddhist approaches to the attainment of enlightenment. Just don't have time to talk at length about Shingon or Tendai or Zen schools. Just briefly, superficially, we can say that the Shingon or True Word School, really it's a name that talks about a number of different traditions that trace their teachings to Kukai. There are various esoteric practices and rituals. Esoteric is a really interesting word, and I wish we had more time to talk about that. It means a number of things. Some people translate it as hidden or secret. It has that implication, but it's not so much that there's a secret sort of privileged form of teaching that only certain people can have. I think some people hold that view, but esoteric has a deeper sense of sort of this unlimited, immediate interpenetration of the Mahabharata kind of Buddha with the being, that sort of thing, and that this takes place in manners that are inconceivable, which are beyond our sort of conventional modes of thought. And so there's this immediate encounter with that which is absolutely true and real, right here and now, that sort of idea. Well, as a result of that, one of the fundamental tenets of the Shingon school is something called Sokushin Jobutsu, or becoming Buddha in this very self, this very body. And there are many tales and narratives about Kukai as becoming Buddha, living in a cave. He's still alive in the cave on Mount Koya. That sort of idea are often presented. Okay. Tendai, or the Platform of Heaven School, which is a rendering from the Chinese Chantai, was said to have been introduced to Japan by Saicho. Its principal scripture is the Lotus Sutra. That's why I guess that what Yuyan is referring to here, when he talks about the one vehicle teaching of the Lotus Sutra, he's probably talking about Tendai. The one vehicle is a reference to the Ekayana or the Mahayana teaching, okay, the Buddha vehicle, which is very much the teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Central to its teachings is an idea of original enlightenment, which is the inherent state or nature of all things. And so the idea is that we need to uncover and realize our original enlightenment. We need to uncover our Buddha nature. Some schools that derive from Tendai or are grounded in many ways in Tendai include the Zen or Chan schools. The Binzai and Soto schools are, of course, the largest that we know of in Japan. There's also Obakushu and other smaller traditions. But in the Soto school, there is this famous phrase, Sokushin Zebutsu, that is, this very self is Buddha, that our original nature is Buddha. That is our Buddha nature, but we don't see it because it's covered up with the dust of our klesha. And so through practice, we wipe away this dust. We come to see our Buddha nature. Okay, so that sort of idea is very much we find within Dogen's teaching, or Dogen's writing in the Soto school. And I wish we had more time to talk about all of that. We just have to kind of go through and see what the Shinshu perspective on all of that is. That's I think what is of interest to all of us. There are a number of schemes of classification of Buddhist teachings, okay, that we find in the Buddhist scriptures and commentaries, and certainly from the Pure Land perspective. One of the ones that we're most familiar with is that of Daocho, or Doshaku, who wrote in his passages on the land of happiness, his Anrakshu Amlechi. He divides all Buddhist teachings into the path of sages and the Pure Land path. So the path of sages comprises most of the Mahayana and Hinayana teachings, which guide sentient beings to the attainment of enlightenment in this life through self-powered practices. So the attainment in the path of sages would mean to attain Buddhahood in this world, this life, or this very body. In contrast, the Pure Land path is said to guide beings to attainment of birth in the Pure Land. I dropped the word birth. Attainment of birth in the Pure Land in the next life through other power. Shinran adopted this classification, but then he also added to it ideas that he inherited from Nagarjuna, Danwan, and Daocho. And so the following passage is a very lengthy one. It comes from one of his works called Gutoku's Notes, Gutokusho. I've quoted it at length. You can find it on pages 587, 588 of Collected Works of Shinran, if you like. I won't read the whole thing. It's pretty lengthy. Basically, what he's doing is he's weaving together all of these various classification schemes. He says, concerning the path of the sages, of the Pure Land path, there are two types, Mahayana and Hinayana. Concerning the Mahayana teaching, there are two types, teachings of sudden attainment, teachings of gradual attainment, etc. Okay? And then here he makes certain distinctions. Concerning the teachings of sudden attainment, there are further two types of teaching and two kinds of transcendence. The two types of teachings are real teachings of the difficult practices, the path of sages, and then he names some of the schools. These are the teachings of Bushing, which Zen was referred to at that time as Shingon Hokke, in which was a reference to Tendai, Kegon, and other schools. And then he talks about the true and real teaching of the easy practice, or Pure Land, is the primal vow of the Pure Land way. This is the teaching of the largest sutra of immeasurable light. Then he says there are different kinds of transcendence lengthwise, this very body is itself Buddha, or becoming Buddha with this very body. Those are the two ideas we just looked at from Shingon and Tendai and Zen. Transcending crosswise, this refers to the selected primal vow, the true and real fulfilled land, immediate attainment of birth. And then he talked about gradual attainment, or accommodated teachings. So there are the accommodated teachings of the path of sages, and so he mentions the Hosso school, one of the Yogacara schools in particular. And in the Pure Land context, he talks about the essential gate. This is the meaning of the Sutra of Contemplation on the Buddha of Immeasurable Life, the Contemplation Sutra. The teachings of meditative and non-meditative good, the three types of meritorious conduct, the good acts done by the 9 grades of beings. And then he talks of different kinds of departure. Okay, so all of this is very complicated, kind of hard to visualize. So I put it together in this little chart, which I introduced in all of my classes, and so all the students here know it by heart. You probably see it in your dreams. This is what's in Japanese known as the Niso Shijuhan. So there's 2 pairs. When you combine them, it ends up with 4 different possibilities. So that we get this little quadrant here. So here are the pairs. On the left-hand side, on page 4 of the handout, you see the distinction between the path of sages and the Pure Land path. So the path of sages is, he says, refers to difficult practices. The Pure Land path refers to easy practice. And then he uses this terminology, which he derives from these various Pure Land writings. The path of sages is symbolized by the term lengthwise realization or attainment. So lengthwise, the word in Japanese is ju. So it's lengthwise, going over the course of time, what you might see, kind of this long linear progression. The Pure Land path is symbolized by the word crosswise, which is this type of idea, okay? This crosswise, transcendent type of realization. On the top of the little chart is the distinction between the true and the accommodated teaching. So the accommodated teachings are referred to by the word gradual attainment, or the symbol is departing, which is the word shutsu. You're departing, he uses that word. Okay? It's kind of this idea of kind of like the little choo-choo train. It's kind of shutsu. Sudden attainment refers to the true and real teachings, and they're symbolized by the word transcending, which is like a leap. The idea of transcending is leaping. So shutsu is maybe shuffling, and transcending is leaping. That's the difference. So you put these 2 pairs together, and you have in the northwest quadrant departing lengthwise. So this refers to the path of sages, the accommodated teachings. And so Shinran uses As an example, Hosso. So it's a Yogacara, consciousness-only kind of school, which is very much focused on yogic practices or visualization practices that must be perfected, and it takes many, many years, lifetimes to accomplish this. And so that's why it's this little bit at a time, just kind of shuffling ahead. So this is the accommodated teaching of difficult practices, the teaching of self-power, realization attained by performing practices for many kalpas. This is a long period of time. On the northeast quadrant is also the path of sages, but here Shinran is referring to the sudden attainment within the path of sages. So here he calls this transcending lengthwise, or jucho. So here he gives examples: Zen, Shingon, Tendai, Kegon, and so on. These are the real teachings of the difficult practices of the path of sages, but still self-power. And here some of the realizations or attainment are expressed as this body is itself Buddha, and becoming Buddha with this very body. Okay, Shingon, Tendai, Zen, etc. On the bottom side, the southwest quadrant represents the Pure Land path. These are the accommodated teachings, provisional teachings of the Pure Land path. Here, the word departing is still used because it's gradual, but now crosswise, departing crosswise. This, he says, is the essential gate of the Pure Land way, the teachings of the Contemplation Sutra, meditative and non-meditative practices, self-power within other power, and the attainment realized is he draws from the many Pure Land scriptures and commentaries, describes it as birth in the womb palace, the borderland, or the realm of indolence and pride. Okay, so birth in Pure Land, but a transformed land, not the real land. Okay, so or is indicated in some of the sutras, you're born in the Pure Land, but you're born inside of a closed lotus blossom. You can see the Buddha, you just can't hear the Buddha. You can't practice the Bodhisattva practices, and you're there for a very, very long time. Anywhere from 500 years to 12 kalpas. It's a long time. And then in the southeast quadrant now represents, in the Pure Land path, the true and real teachings, which he calls transcending crosswise, or O-cho. This represents the great practice, Nembutsu, directed through other power. And here the attainment is birth in the true and real fulfilled land, the immediate attainment of birth. Okay, so this represents Shinran's scheme of classification. So all of that sort of is incorporated within Yuyen's discourse here, okay? Now, even with a little chart, it's hard to visualize. And so I've tried out this this sort of image, and it's an example that, you know, all analogies fail at some points, but here's what I try to do. Some of you have been in my class, you're familiar with this. So you think about a garden hose. This is a garden hose. Artwork is outstanding. This is an ant. The ant wants to get, or maybe let's say the ant is stuck inside the garden hose. Maybe that's a better way. It's improving. This analogy is improving even as we speak. Okay? So the ant is inside the garden hose, and this end is blocked off. We'll say that. Okay. So the ant cannot get out this way. The ant needs to get out of the garden hose. So how does the ant get out? The ant could shuffle along the whole length of the garden hose, but it takes a very, very long time. This is what Shinran might call jushutsu, okay, transcending length, departing lengthwise. It takes a very, very long time. Okay, so this would represent the accommodated teachings of the path of sages. Or maybe something comes along, like someone here blows into the garden hose, or maybe someone turns on the faucet and the water shoots out, and the ant shoots up to the end of the garden hose. This is what we call sudden attainment of the path of sages, okay? Or the northeast quadrant, transcending lengthwise. However, there are other ways of doing it. Maybe the ant is kind of smart and says, you know, I don't want to go up this whole way. I can chip out the side of the garden hose. I think it's not very thick, and if I get the right hammer and chisel and I work hard enough, or if I think about it long enough, I'll get out this way. And so the ant thinks, okay, I'm going to do this, but it takes a long time because the ant is busy chopping away. This is departing crosswise. This is the southwest quadrant, the essential teaching of the Pure Land way. However, maybe someone comes along and says, oh, there's an ant stuck in this garden hose, and just chops it open. And the ant is able to leave the garden hose. This might be referred to as transcending crosswise. This is where my analogy breaks down. Not sure how. But that's the imagery, at least it's helpful to me. And so I think Shinran is providing this sort of comparison of different teachings, but also different forms of attainment. Okay? So anyway, I think you've all encountered this. You've studied in the correspondence course and taken other courses. This is what's known as Niso Shijuhan, the two pairs and four sort of implications, I guess. Okay. So, but that has a lot to do with what we're doing here. So I won't go over all of this again. Another related sort of element of Shinran's critical classification, we see on page 5, about midway down the page, is the idea of the Dharma ages. I think you're all familiar with this, but this is also a theory. There are many Dharma age theories, by the way. This Dharma age theory is usually attributed to Tao Chou in the Pure Land tradition. Tao Chou was really sort of just, he was also just transmitting some of the accepted theories of the Dharma age, or accepted Dharma age theories. But the Dharma age theory is really based on this idea, is that we are human beings, and even people who aspire for Buddhahood, you know, we're human beings, and after a while, we just don't get things right. We mess up somewhere down the line. That's the that's the Dharma age theory. Could be the garden hose theory too. So it goes something like this. We talked about, if we do the whispering game, or whatever that's called, telephone game. Telephone game. So if I whisper a secret message to Tao's ear, and he's supposed to then turn and whisper the same message to Akiko, and she does the same to CJ, and go around the room. By the time Blaine gets the message and he tells it to us, I would guess the message that I gave and the message you gave is going to be totally different. Okay, that's the theory behind the Dharma ages. Okay, that along the way, human beings mess up. Okay, especially if the fact that we don't have our teacher, we don't have a guide, we don't have our sort of inspiration to be there for us. And so that the idea is that when Shakyamuni Buddha was in the world, everything was peachy keen. Okay, he taught the Dharma, he guided people in the practices, and he helped people realize nirvana. Okay, and so that was great. Then he died. Okay, or he entered into parinirvana. He was no longer around in physical form. And so people had to continue on in some way. They heard the teaching, memorized the teachings, recited the teachings, transmitted the teachings in some form, gradually coming into written form perhaps. And somewhere along the way, you know, people were somehow getting by. So they could still hear the true teaching, still practice in the same way, and realize the same realization of nirvana that Shakyamuni realized. But then after 500 years, things began to get a little fuzzy around the edges. And people could hear the teachings now, they could read them, and they could hear them, and they could engage in practices, but no one was having the same realization. No one was realizing the same attainment as the Buddha anymore. This is called the semblance of the Dharma age, okay? Which means it looks like Buddhism, it smells like Buddhism, it talks like Buddhism, but it's not Buddhism, okay? Because no one's becoming a Buddha. And then there's the last Dharma age, which is the fact that the idea that the teachings remain, but no one does the right practices anymore, because no one knows how to do it anymore. And plus, there's so many other kind of competing pressures, competing ideas and pressures. No one practices the correct way anymore, and of course no one realizes the same attainment. So this is the last Dharma age, which is said to extend over a 10,000 year period. And then after that is the extinction of the Dharma age, which goes on for endless kalpas of time, okay? Until the next Buddha appears, Maitreya Buddha appears in this world and teaches the Dharma again. Okay? So that's the Dharma age theory. Anyway, Tao Chou passed on certain renderings of that theory, and he did a calculation that in fact, at his time, this was the last Dharma age, Shinran inherited this, read Tao Chou, and did his own calculation. He said, oh yeah, we're 673 years into the last Dharma age. There's some interesting theories. People have done the math. They've compared calendars. They think he might have been 10 years off. We might be, you know, there's a little discrepancy in his calculation. I think he said 683. Now this CWS is 673. Anyway, be that as it may, from this he says, we're now in the last Dharma age, and as a result he concludes, this is his writing at the bottom of page 5, truly we know that the teachings of the path of sages were intended for the period when the Buddha was in the world, and for the right Dharma age. So the path of the sages, that's for when the Buddha is around and for the next 500 years. They are altogether inappropriate for the times and beings of the semblance of the last Dharma ages, and the age when the Dharma has become extinct. Already their time has passed, they are no longer in accord with beings. Okay? So that's a very strong statement. The times and the beings have changed, and so those teachings, as wonderful as they are, as fantastic as they are, they don't in accord. They're no longer in accord with beings. Okay? They're just beings are incapable of learning and practicing those teachings. Okay? So that's the Dharma age theory, and that's how it sort of fits into this whole discussion that's going on in section 15. And therefore, he says, it's important, it's necessary, it's vital that we enter the Pure Land way. Okay? We entrust ourselves to the vow of Amida Buddha. Let's see. I'm going to skip over this next part, page 6, section E. That's really the way he contrasts what he sees as the true essence of the Pure Land way from other Pure Land paths. It's really not directly relevant to this section, so I'll skip over it, but it is important, and I'll if you have questions about it, or if you'd like to talk about it, I'd be very happy to do so. So I'm moving on then to this last section, which is a very long section, True Attainment in Shin Buddhism, Birth and Realization of Supreme Nirvana. As I mentioned before, in the chapter on realization, or enlightenment, or realizing, however we want to translate the idea of sho, Shinran says a number of things. Okay, and so he starts out that chapter with these words: to reveal with reverence the true realization is a wondrous state attained through Amida's perfect benefiting of others. It is the ultimate fruition of supreme nirvana. It arises from the vow of necessary attainment of nirvana, also known as the vow of realization of great nirvana, which is the 11th vow for all of you who know this very, very well. Okay, and so he then grounds he finds the very foundation for attainment, for the realization, enlightenment within the 11th vow. He does a very interesting thing along the way, however, and I'm going to kind of skip through a lot of this stuff, is that if you look at the words of the vow themselves, which is on the top of page 7, it says this: if when I attain Buddhahood, the human beings and devas in my land do not dwell among the settled and necessarily attain nirvana, may I not attain supreme enlightenment. In other words, if you read the 11th vow strictly and carefully and literally, it seems to say beings who are born in the Pure Land will dwell among the settled, okay, and necessarily attain nirvana. So it means beings who, you have to first be born in the Pure Land in order to dwell in the rank of true settlement, or to realize the necessary attainment of nirvana, the fact that there's no question, you'll now realize non-retrogression. That's the literal meaning of the 11th vow, okay? In the passage on the fulfillment of the vow, it says the same thing, which is the next passage. The sentient beings born in that land all dwell among the truly settled, for in that Buddha land there is not one who is falsely settled or not settled. So it makes it even clearer, those who were born in the land dwell among the truly settled. So that's sort of the traditional scheme in Pure Land Buddhism, is that beings in this world, we're hopeless and helpless. We're not going to get to enlightenment. So we aspire to be born in the Buddha land. We do whatever practices, or have whatever heart and mind, whatever faith, to be born in that land. And when we're born there, then we enter the ranks of true settlement. That is to say, our eventual enlightenment is assured. we'll never fall back. We realize non-retrogression. All of these things are described in the Pure Lands Sutras and the commentaries. Shinran, having inherited this, does something quite remarkable, because he goes on then to say, not only are we talking about beings who are born in the Pure Land, but it's about beings who will be born in the Pure Land. Okay, so he adds that feature into it, and really in his other writings with the implication is that we're not simply about talking about birth in the Pure Land at the moment of death, but it's the realization of Shinjin. As one awakens to the working of true reality in this life, right here and now, one realizes benefits, and those benefits include things like entering into the ranks of true settlement, that one's enlightenment is absolutely assured, that one realizes non-retrogression, one will never fall back into evil courses, okay? All of these things that had traditionally been used to describe those who are born in the Pure Land, Shinran now broadens that to include those people who realize Shinjin in this life. Okay? That's one of the real radical and revolutionary things that Shinran does. No one thought of that before. No one said that before. Okay? Shinran is the one who presents this. He also radically presents a new understanding of the Pure Land. Okay? The Pure Land, as set out in the larger sutra, is clearly something called Sambhogakaya. That is, it's a land that comes about through a bodhisattva. In the story that you're all familiar with, the bodhisattva Dharmakara aspired to become a Buddha. And so he made many vows, 48 vows specifically. And among those vows he said, I'll become this kind of Buddha, okay? I'll be the Buddha of immeasurable light and life. I'll create this kind of Dharma land, Buddha land. And in this Buddha land, beings will be able to be born there. And when they're born there, they're going to be able to practice and eventually become enlightened, okay? And if that's not true, I won't become a Buddha. Okay? That's what Dharmakara Bodhisattva vowed in his 48 vows. And then, as you know, according to the larger sutra, he went out, he practiced bodhisattva practices for endless kalpas. And he perfected those practices, therefore fulfilling his vows. That is, he became a Buddha. He became a Mida Buddha, a fulfilled Buddha. He created a land, a fulfilled land. Okay? And what that meant is that this land then became everything that he wanted it to be, everything that he vowed it would become. So beings born there would be able to realize the real settlement of their enlightenment. They'd never fall back, and they would become bodhisattvas and able to practice the way to enlightenment. Okay, that's the literal meaning of the larger sutra, and for many Pure Land Buddhists, for many, many thousands of years, this is how they viewed the Pure Land. Okay. Shinran, in a very dramatic way, doesn't use that sort of narrative to describe the Pure Land. Rather, he says the Pure Land is the realm of immeasurable light. It's nirvana itself. The Pure Land is nirvana. And beings born in the Pure Land, that's a symbolic expression, meaning attain enlightenment. Okay, and so he does many things, and so in many ways, he then sets out this really, I think, very revolutionary perspective that the Pure Land is nirvana itself. And so, anyway, that's another aspect. So, how does all of this fit together? What does it mean in terms of the issue being raised by Yuyen in section 15 of the Tannisho? Because now we find, I'm guessing he's responding to Shin Buddhists. I don't think he's probably responding to Shingon or Tendai Buddhists. I don't think not that he wouldn't care, but I don't think that's really on his plate. He's responding probably to Shin Buddhists or Shinshu followers who are saying, well, you know, if I realize Shinjin, I become a Buddha in this life, this very body. Isn't that what Shinran is saying? Because we realize the true settlement of birth. We realize non-retrogression. Our enlightenment is absolutely assured. You know, or as Shinran says, we part forever from birth and death. Doesn't that mean we're enlightened? Doesn't that mean, you know, this world is a Pure Land? that's the kind of question that was probably being raised by Shin Buddhists at the time, and to which Yuyan says, hold the phone, let's, let's understand what Shinran was teaching us. He doesn't teach us that, he teaches us something very different, as Yuyan says in the section. Anyway, so there's a big background to that, that's all I'm suggesting. There's a large, very extensive background to the propositions, the assertions Yuyan is making in the section. And we just don't have time to get into all that. There are a lot of, I just want to, I'll walk you through some of this outline because I already see we're running out of time. Oh yes. Okay, so I'll walk you through this and then just suggest that if you would like to talk about it today, or if you want to use this as a study guide for the future, I would invite you to do so. So we're on page 7, just kind of walking through this. So section B is Shinran's understanding that the Pure Land is the realm of nirvana, birth in the Pure Land is the attainment of enlightenment. Okay. So the question then on the bottom of page 7 is, what does it mean? What do we realize, what do we attain in the present life? What does that mean? He then goes through an analysis of the larger sutra, particularly the passage on the fulfillment of the 18th vow, in which it said, sentient beings, when they hear the name, this is on in page 8 now, realize even one thought moment of shinjin and joy, which is directed to them from me, the sincere mind, and aspiring to be born in that land, they then attain birth. Okay, so he focuses on this phrase, they then attain birth, which is the phrase sokutoku ojo. Okay, and so that idea, if in fact he's saying, well, birth in the Pure Land means we become Buddhas, and yet he's also saying, in the moment of Shinjin, we attain birth. Doesn't that mean we become Buddhas? I think that's how some people would sort of work that out. And Shinran is very, very careful as he works through this logic to, he's extremely careful. He does not say that we become Buddhas. He uses lots of different kind of puzzling words. So for instance, if you look on the bottom of page 8, this is section 5, he interprets the word sokutoku ojo in one of his writings. Okay, he says, they then attain birth, soku, then soku means immediately, without any time elapsing, without a day passing. So that means when a person hears the name and realizes shinjin and joy, bam, at that moment they attain birth. But soku also means to ascend to and become established in a certain rank. And then, this interesting phrase, attain. What does it mean to attain? Attain means to have attained what one shall attain. This is the kind of language that Shuna loves to use. Okay? It's sort of this really, very funny use of language, but when you think about it, it's a very careful use of language, okay? Because he's saying, we have attained something, that's the past perfect, of what we shall attain, that's the future tense, okay? We have attained now what we will attain in the future, okay? That sort of thinking is, we see, laced throughout his writings, okay? At the same time, there's also this sense of, what is it that we attain? What is the nature of the life of the person of Shinjin? The heart and mind and life of the person of Shinjin is another question that he raises. So this is on the next page, page 9, when he talks about the realization of Shinjin, or the word here in this section is the settlement of Shinjin that Yuyan uses. I think it's important for us to think about the way in which Shinran described and understood the attainment by persons of Shinjin. So there are really 10 that we can sort of, 10 categories. So this is on the bottom of page 9. For instance, they are those who have joined the ranks of the truly settled, those who have attained the stage of non-retrogression, those who have attained the equal of supreme enlightenment, those who are equal to the Tathagatas, those who are the same as Maitreya, those bodhisattvas who are necessarily settled in attaining enlightenment, those who will become Buddhas, true disciples of Buddha, most excellent persons, etc., rare persons. And then, I'm sorry, I got down and I realized I didn't put in this last number 10, it's a Jodo Wasan. So this is, let me give you a reference, not actually Jodo Wasan. Okay. this is actually, well, it is Jodowas, I think, back. So if you have collected works of Shinran, page 357, the hymn 116, 116. This is this word, Senko ni. Okay? It says, such beings are like people who, imbued with incense, bear its fragrance on their bodies. They may be called those adorned with the fragrance of light. I always like that expression, the fragrance of light. So it's kind of like, think about what we're going through today. You know, we think about all of our friends and people that we don't know who are suffering so terribly from the North Bay fires. It's a horrible experience, terrible, and I don't want to belittle it in any way. One of our staff members is actually going through this. Her home is in Fairfield, and it's really a real danger of it being destroyed. And many other people have lost their lives and homes and business. So I don't in any way downplay the severity of that. But you know, we're also being affected in a lesser way. You know, we're imbued with the smoke of the fire. So everywhere we go, there's smoke. You know, you can smell it. You know, here in the Jodo Shinshu Center, you can smell it in your car. You'll probably, when you go home, you'll have it in your clothes, probably in your hair. And that's what's to be imbued with means. And so the idea of being imbued with incense is what being discussed as Senko ni. So the person of Shinjin is imbued with incense, or maybe adorned with the fragrance of light. For those of you who are interested in this kind of thing, I just want to draw, yeah, there you go. Exactly, exactly. So when you go through your, that's right. That's the motion, okay. Anyway, just for, if you're interested, in another text, his notes on the inscriptions on sacred scrolls, Shinran is talking about the Surangama Samadhi Sutra, and on page 498, he cites some passages from that. So on the very bottom of the page, he has this reference. They are like persons who, imbued with incense, possess its fragrance. A person with a heart of Nembutsu is like one whose body is possessed of fragrance. The heart of Mahasamaprapta is thus likened to a person possessing fragrance. Okay? Hence it is stated, he is called one adorned with the fragrance of light. So anyway, that's where it comes from. It comes from the Surangama Samadhi Sutra. Anyway, so those are all the scripts. So I'm sort of I always get off different tangents. But Shinran used many different ways of describing the heart and mind and life of a person of Shinran, in this world, this life. And he used many expressions. I just want to point to a couple. We've already talked about entering the ranks of the truly settled and attaining the stage of non-retrogression. There are a couple I just want to point to. One is on page 10, the bottom of page G. The same is Maitreya. Miroku ni onaji kishito. Okay? And so Shinran uses this phrase quite often. It comes from a Chinese text, the being who is the same as Maitreya. But Shinran discusses this quite often. Okay? So he says, the true and real Shinjin explained above is the diamond-like mind of crosswise leap, realized through other power. Remember that, breaking through the hose, okay? Hence the larger sutra teaches that the person of the Nembutsu is of the stage next to enlightenment, like Maitreya. Like persons of Shinjin, which is other power, are like Maitreya, in that they rise to the stage of non-retrogression in their present life, and will unfailingly attain the enlightenment of supreme nirvana. And then he goes on to say, because Maitreya Bodhisattva, as many of you know, we talked about Maitreya already, is dwelling in Tushita heaven, and after the end of the age in which the extinction of Dharma, how many years is that? 5,670,000,000 years. Okay? In that time, Maitreya will attain supreme enlightenment and become the next Buddha in that world. In like manner, Shinran says, the person of Shinjin will attain supreme nirvana at the end of his life, or her life. Okay? Thus we know that because Mahasattva Maitreya has perfectly realized the diamond mind of the stage equal to enlightenment, he will without fail attain the stage of supreme enlightenment beneath the dragon flower tree at the dawn of the three assemblies. Because sentient beings of the Nembutsu have perfectly realized the diamond-like mind of crosswise transcendence, They transcend and realize great complete nirvana on the eve of the moment of death. Hence the words as such the same. Okay. So in other words, by likening the person of Shinjin to Maitreya, Shinran is really emphasizing that in this world one is like that Bodhisattva, in the next life one will become Buddha. And then this other phrase, which is quite puzzling, is an interesting one on page 11, section H, person equal to the Tathagatas. Nyorai to shiki hito. And so Shinran declares the persons of Shinjin are equal to of Tathagata, or to Tathagatas. Okay. Now, this is confusing, okay, because it seems to be saying, well, sure, person of Shinjin, we're the same as Buddhas. Tathagata means Buddha, so aren't we Buddhas? I think the weakness here is in the translation. Equal is a bad translation. Okay? That's the problem here. Because the meaning of hitoshi is not the same, okay, although it's equal. So this is a hard thing to figure out, okay? Shinran makes a fine distinction between these words, okay? So let me just read this portion to you. This is from a letter that he writes. Well, I'll just preface this letter. Obviously, when Shinran, he was, as you know his story, he was up in Kanto, then he returned to Kyoto for the remaining, 30 years of his life. At the time, people did come down to visit him. That's why we have the Tannisho. But also people wrote letters because they had questions and there was confusion and doubt. And Shinran would respond to their letters, trying to guide them using that form. And I'm sure one of the big issues you can see in the number of letters that address this issue, the question is, what does it mean to be equal to the Tathagatas? You can just see people saying, I'm a Buddha, I'm a Tathagata, or is that what happens when I become Shinjin? And they're saying, no, you don't, that's not what this means. And so all of that discussion is going on. Shinran has to address it many, many times. Many of the letters talk about this. So this is one example of one of the letters that we find in the Mattosho, the lamp from the latter ages, where he says, now the larger sutra speaks of the stage next to enlightenment like Maitreya. Since Maitreya is already close to Buddhahood, it is the custom in various schools to speak of him as Maitreya Buddha. Since those counted among the truly settled are of the same stage as Maitreya, they are also said to be equal to the Tathagatas. Know that persons of true Shinjin can be called the equal of Tathagatas because, even though they themselves are always impure and creating karmic evil, their hearts and minds are already equal to Tathagatas. That's kind of interesting. Since beings of Shinjin, their minds are impure, we're creating karmic evil. That's sort of the definition of one who is not a Buddha. Yet the hearts and minds are equal to the Tathagatas. Again, I think the problem is in the translation. Hitoshi doesn't mean equal, okay? It means similar, really very, very close, but not quite the same. That's kind of what the word means. Really, really close, but not the same. So it's sort of like in the more traditional schemes of Buddhahood. Buddhahood consists of two stages, okay? There's the 51st stage, the stage equal to enlightenment, and then there's a 52nd stage, which is a stage of complete, perfect enlightenment. A Buddha of the 51st stage is not a Buddha, but very, very close. The 52nd stage is complete supreme enlightenment, okay? What's interesting is that Shinran knew that, and he actually used that phrase, one who is equal, realize the equal enlightenment, okay? That also describes a person of Shinjin. So, again, I think Shinran is saying in a very careful and subtle way, the person of Shinjin is not a Buddha, okay? It's not the attainment of Buddhahood. Okay, I've gone on long enough. There's a lot of other stuff, but I wanted to sort of just follow up along the lines of sort of what Shinran hints at there. Is he suggesting there's a mind difference between mind and body? Is that what he's saying? It's kind of hard to say, and I'm not sure if that's what's going on, but there's some interesting expressions that Shinran uses. For instance, I have it at the very end somewhere. If you look on page 14, just a few references Shinran makes. One is in another letter. Again, he writes these letters to the Nembutsu followers in the northern regions. He's saying, the heart is at the very bottom, number 16. The heart of the person of Shinjin already and always resides in the Pure Land. Wow, that's interesting. So the person of Shinjin not our bodies, but our hearts. Okay? The heart and mind of the person of Shinjin already and always resides in the Pure Land. What the heck does that mean? Okay? It's a puzzle. You know, I think that's one of the things that we have to really think about. And then there's a hymn that's attributed to Shinran. It's not within the regular volumes that are compiled, but it's attributed to Shinran. It goes like this: having heard the transcendent, compassionate vow, could it be that we are no longer beings mired in birth and death? Though our defiled selves have not changed at all, our hearts play in the Pure Land. Okay? So that's a hymn which is the favorite of many people, one of my favorites. But what does it mean? Okay, I think that's the question. Okay, there's a lot of questions it raises, perhaps more so than it answers. Okay, so as you can see, I also didn't finish my outline. So one last point, because this is something that Shinran also incorporates within his thought, is what occurs then after death. Okay, and so Shinran uses the terminology again. We see Yuyan talk about the great ship of the vow. And in many ways, I think he's referencing not only Shinran's spoken words, but his written words. So on the bottom of page 12 and the top of page 13, I just want to end with these phrases, that passage that we find in Shinran's writings. Okay. So at the bottom of page 12, because sentient beings of the Nembutsu have perfectly realized the diamond-like mind of crosswise transcendence, they transcend and realize great complete nirvana on the eve of the moment of death. And then he says, thus, when one has boarded the ship of the vow of great compassion and sailed out on the vast ocean of light, the winds of perfect virtue blow softly, and the waves of evil are transformed. The darkness of ignorance is immediately broken through, and quickly reaching the land of immeasurable light, one realizes great nirvana and acts in accord with the virtue of Samantabhadra. That is, one then returns to this world as a Genso Bodhisattva. Anyway, so that's just some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you, kind of scattered and talked about a lot of things really quickly. But I think this is the kind of thinking that we find in Shinran that lies beneath the wording that Yuyan presents. Okay, and so I think it's an important issue. You know, it's not just an issue that was alive back in medieval Japan, but I think it's alive today. Anyway, so I just wanted to share some thoughts with you. I think this is time for a break, unless there are any questions or comments right now. Yes, please.
So, when Shinran says the heart of a person of Shinjin already and always resides in the Pure Land, is he usually actually using the word kokoro for heart, or is it? Oh. So I mean, they're literally saying, like, that's what I've always been, when they say the heart, I'm trying to understand, like, the social, like,
Heart,
understanding.
mind.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's great. They use the word kokoro in kana, so it's not written in kanji.
Oh.
So it's very interesting. I mean, it's some interesting suggestions. In many ways, I think it raises more questions than it answers. I mean, is he saying there's a distinction between mind and body? Or is he saying, you know, is that what's going on? Or is our mind, is that really Buddha? The body is defiled? You know, and when he says the heart of the person of Shinjin already and always resides in the Pure Land, what the heck does that mean? Okay, is that a kind of original enlightenment reference? You know, he's just playing with our sense of time and space. There's a lot of questions, okay, lots of questions. And the other thing to remember is, you know, that was in a letter. Not that his letters are any less important than his other writings. I think they're just as important from different standpoints. But they're a letter written to someone in northern Japan. And it may well be that the person is very learned, or maybe the person, just needed to be addressed in more colloquial terms. I'm not sure. So there's a lot of historical background that we need to know about that. I mean, I personally like those expressions very, very much. But I think we have to be careful in how much we draw from them. They could be inspiring to us, though. And so in our own personal, religious, and spiritual lives, they could be wholly inspiring. And I think they are. But that's a difference between saying, and Shinran said, the person of Shinjin realizes enlightenment of this world. There's a very big difference between the two things.
Like, it feels like it's almost, in certain ways, you could interpret it as like a predestination thing, like I'm born to
Good.
achieve
Yeah.
Shinjin,
Yeah.
to be born in your land.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, absolutely.
but that's also scary.
That's also scary.
Yeah,
Right,
because
right. And so, yeah, some of these, yeah, is it a matter of predestination or determinism? I don't think those are issues Shinran dealt with in that same way we do, but those are still issues, right? And still issues that we need to deal with, so you're right. I think those are many of the thoughts that are important for us to consider as we think about this and what it means. And I don't think there's one answer, to be quite honest. I think, a lot of it is, one answer as far as how, let me say that, let me make myself clear. I'll try to be more careful with my wording like Shinran was. I think the way in which we kind of appreciate those kind of phrases that we find in the letters and in the hymn attributed to Shinran, I think, there's a lot of kind of a subjective sense of appreciation, or the Japanese word is our ajiwai, the way in which we sort of, which it speaks to us, right? And so I think that's important. So I would encourage people to really think about these things in that way. What does it mean to you? What does it say? How does it speak to you? But again, let me just reiterate, I think there's a difference between saying that and then saying, oh, Shinran teaches us this. So, which I don't think any of us are doing. But there are people who do that, okay, just to let you know. So, we just need to be cautious, not cautious, we need to be careful as well. I'm getting more and more careful as I'm getting older. I was less careful when I was younger. So. There's a camera on me though, so I had to be. Any other thoughts or questions? Let's take a break.